Well, good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960. I've got an opportunity today to introduce you again to Lisa Baiton, who is the Chief Executive Officer, the President and Chief Executive Officer of the CAPP, Canada's largest oil and natural gas industry association. We've chatted with her before. She was just brand new in her job when I first chatted with her. She's now been there for a little bit of time, and I think we can chat about what's going on in the oil and gas and natural gas business. Welcome back, Lisa, to the show. How are you?
I'm great. How are you doing, Brian?
It's been an incredible sort of year and a bit that you have had this position through an incredible amount of turmoil internationally and its impact on the oil and gas business transition, both at your organization, I understand, but also more importantly, the entire oil and natural gas industry. Last year, when you joined, we just had the invasion of Ukraine by Russia. Tell me what's happened in the last year with all of those changes.
Yeah, for sure. Looking back, when I started almost 20 months ago, Russia had just begun its invasion of Ukraine. Putin held Europe hostage over energy, and that triggered an energy supply crisis and raised energy security concerns amongst the Western Alliance. OPEC was and still is constraining the supply to keep prices high. And we really saw a shift in industrial nationalism, and that was a growing feature of energy transition strategies across the G7, with the U.S. Really taking the lead with the landmark piece of legislation, the U.S. Inflation Reduction Act. But we also really saw the cost of living and affordability crisis emerge, impacting citizens globally. And it really required governments globally to reassess their pace of transition policies. And then I would just say, finally, geopolitical volatility across the globe generally has really trumped capital market and investment considerations around the world. And then I guess more closer to home domestically, the Canadian oil and gas industry, we're at near records of oil and natural gas production. Many of my members, my producers, have experienced strong financial growth after a near decade of probably the worst time in the industry. And I would say it's a time of a lot of volatility. And even though you've seen the upswing on the financial growth side, we still see a lot of significant risk on the policy front, particularly here domestically. So it has been a role of a lifetime. For me, it's been more meaningfully a chance to really realize what I see as a generational opportunity for Canada.
A generational opportunity for Canada. That's interesting. I need you to explain that. But also, I want you to, address. You talk about industrial nationalism, which is a fascinating term. Oil and gas is Canada's greatest resource asset, greatest competitive advantage. But we're not treating it like a national treasure, are we?
No, we are not, and it's heartbreaking some days. I have to tell you, one of Canada's greatest competitive advantages is indeed our energy advantage. We are blessed with a world-class natural resources base, and we're the fourth largest oil producer in the world. We're the fifth largest natural gas producer in the world. We have oil reserves larger than Russia, but our competitive advantage really isn't just about resource wealth. What distinguishes Canada from other countries like Saudi or Russia is that we produce our resources with among the highest human rights and environmental standards in the world. And we have a unique combination of a commitment to climate action, capital investment in clean technology and innovation. We have workers with talent to produce our resources cost effectively and responsibly. We have a stable democratic government, and we have systems in place to ensure financial benefits from those resources are shared with Canadians across the country. You mentioned the rise of industrial nationalism. If I look at the U.S. approach with the U.S. Inflation Reduction Act, or the U.S. IRA, it is in essence a all-you-can-eat buffet of $500 billion market incentives because the U.S. wants to own the entire energy spectrum, including traditional energy, and wants to incent that investment to come to the U.S. for the benefit of Americans. Whereas here in Canada, we're taking a much more, I often compare the U.S. all-you-can-eat buffet of carrots to Canada's all-you-can-eat buffet of baseball bats. We take a very complex, cumbersome, punitive approach to our regulatory environment, and it's really impacting. It's really constraining capital coming to our country. Investors, I spent a third of my career working for one of the top 10 global funds, and I know that capital is global, it's agile, it's mobile, and it will go to countries where there's the most regulatory certainty and the greatest investor certainty with potential for the highest rate of return. And certainly, I think Canada has not put its head above the parapet, particularly to look at our competitors just to the south of us, and realize we are in a competition and for that capital. So I'm really keen on Canada just having a reset so we can realize that energy advantage, to position Canada as a leader on the global path to net zero, as a country that can provide secure, responsibly produced oil and natural gas to help lower GHG emissions, as a trusted brand on the world stage, acting as a valued ally to the Western Alliance and a source of energy security, and importantly here at home, as an economic powerhouse, investing in the very technologies of the future that are going to benefit all Canadians. So that's what I call the energy advantage.
The energy advantage. I just don't think we realize, and we certainly don't promote, exploit, and support to the extent that we could or should. We're going to take a break, though, for some messages and come back in just 2 minutes with Lisa Baiton, President CEO of CAPP, which is the representative of Canada's largest oil and natural gas industry association. In just 2 minutes, I'm going to ask her why we've got it so wrong and what we can do to solve it. Stay with us, everyone. Back in 2 minutes. Welcome back, everyone, to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960. My guest tonight is Lisa Baiton. She is the president and CEO of an organization called CAPP, which is an industry association that represents the largest oil and gas natural gas industry association in Canada. Lisa, you've been in public affairs, you've been in politics, you've been in as you said, capital markets, investment management for a big pension fund. You've had a lot of different, very interesting jobs. What motivated you to take a job leading the oil and gas business, particularly when you said it was a time for a generational change? What's the motivation? What's the excitement? What's the passion?
Well, the passion is for Canada. And, I would say the industry is facing probably the most consequential set of threats at this moment in time in our history. But equally, we're facing the biggest set of opportunities. In terms of why I took the role, I was sitting in one of the top 10 global funds about just over a decade ago, when the LNG opportunity was emerging. And we were so excited for Canada about that. That should have been an opportunity. The liquefied natural gas, or LNG opportunity, should have really been Canada's to own a decade ago. And, at that time, the U.S. was nowhere on LNG. And now they're the world's largest exporter of LNG. And we have to put a lot of our liquefied natural gas to get it to market. We have to get it, put it through the United States, when that could have been, we could have owned that entire opportunity. And we have And while I let me pause on the LNG opportunity, we still have a lot of opportunity there. A review by Wood Mackenzie found that Canadian LNG exports to Asia could reduce net global emissions by 108 million tons of CO2 per year. And that's really the equivalent of removing all of Canada's 41 million cars from the road. And although the US got the head start on us on that, the global LNG market is growing. Shell's 2023 LNG outlook is forecasting LNG demand will outpace supply by 2040. And that's because countries around the world are really turning to natural gas, both for their energy security and to transition away from other dirtier forms of fuel like coal to lower their emissions. I remember shortly after I started last fall, the German chancellor came to Canada, and it was said at the time, and I was absolutely in disbelief when I heard
There's
this.
no business case.
That there was no business case for LNG, and the German chancellor went back to Germany, and it just makes my head shake that LNG has been able to rapidly expand their LNG import capacity. They have built 3 such LNG import facilities in under 2 years.
Where?
And likewise, Japan and Singapore have adopted strategic gas storage reserves. The EU has declared natural gas as a green fuel late last year, has mandated minimum gas storage levels to protect the EU bloc from global supply disruptions. So Canada still has an opportunity here on LNG. We have the LNG export facility, LNG Canada, is set for completion in 2025, and we have 3 others, all Indigenous, with all have Indigenous equity ownership in it, are in the queue, and we have an opportunity to catch up. But going back to your question about why the passion, we could have owned a bigger, a significantly larger. We could be the largest LNG export country in the world, and the U.S. took that away from us. And we're in the same moment now with the U.S. industrial energy policy, where they're linking market-based incentives not just to energy policy and really wanting to attract global capital to U.S. to have that investment made in the U.S. for the benefit of Americans, but they're also very eyes wide open on energy security. You can't have energy national security without energy security. So I'm really keen on Canada catching up, getting. If I could have a fairy tale wish, I would just ask for a complete white canvas, blank slate, and just have a complete reset of our greatest barrier in Canada, which is an uncompetitive and complex regulatory and policy environment that sees Canada languishing in an ever more competitive global economy.
Wow. An uncompetitive and overly complex regulatory environment.
Mm-hmm.
So government is the problem.
Yes.
God, you sound like Ronald Reagan. Government's not the solution. Government's the problem. So tell me, if you were Prime Minister or the Minister of Energy or Minister of the Environment, what would you do?
I would have a complete reset for sure. We can't I talked about the US IRA, and certainly Canada may not be able to compete dollar for dollar with a half a trillion dollar incentive program, but we certainly can do a lot more in Canada. For example, right now, our policy environment does not acknowledge the critical importance of Canadian oil and gas to our economy or to our Western allies. It ignores the time value of money and the need for critical infrastructure permitting to move with speed and with certainty, particularly in a capital-constrained environment. And it takes a punitive approach to regulation when, as I said, our greatest competitor, the U.S. next door, is taking a market-based incentive approach to drive investment and create jobs. And as a result, Canada is failing to attract the very large scale capital investment that Canada needs to push towards a lower emissions, sustainable, prosperous economy. As I said, capital is global, it's agile, it's mobile. It's naturally going to flow to countries where there are predictable regulatory and policy frameworks. Again, putting my old capital markets hat on, when investors consider where to place their dollars, particularly in large scale and long dated projects and where outcomes can be binary, they ask, how predictable the regulatory and policy environment frameworks are in a country. Particularly considering that the payback periods for these types of assets is very long, and the forecasting required is very far into the future. And if investors see regulatory uncertainty or regulatory risk, that impedes the cost of capital, and eventually the cost of capital can become prohibitive. And really, that's our issue for Canada right now. To be clear, go ahead. Sorry.
So let me be clear here, or understand better if I could. So you're not suggesting no regulatory reviews or impediments. You're just saying that you need to have a streamlined or a known or a certain one. Is that the problem? Because when I've gone out to Alberta and I've met with oil and gas people, I recently purchased a facility in Fort McMurray, for an example, and ended up spending a fair amount of time understanding the sentiment of people in the oil and gas business at the time. Obviously, not to the degree that you have. I didn't meet climate change deniers. I didn't meet people that wanted no regulation. They just wanted it to be done more quickly with more certainty. So what's the position that you're arguing for?
Well, again, going back to we can't compete with the U.S. for the market incentives, $500 billion market incentives, but we can move with speed. And the Germany example I gave you, where they were able to, from nothing, make a decision to build projects in the national interest and build 3 LNG import facilities in under 2 years. In Canada, our permitting process, from time to consumption to getting something built, the average is somewhere between 8 to 16 years, and we need
8 to 16 years to get something approved and built.
Yes, so that's something we can really tackle. And you talk about climate change. I really want to underscore that at least all of my members are really committed to sustainability and climate reduction. And in fact, what a lot of people don't realize is they're among the largest spenders on clean technology investment in the country, and they've been proactively working to reduce emissions in the absence of a legislated cap. Over the last decade, the Canadian upstream oil and gas industry has been able to grow total production from the conventional sector by 21%, while reducing carbon dioxide equivalent emissions by 24%. On the nat gas side, we were able to grow our production by 35%, while lowering carbon dioxide equivalent emissions by 22% and methane by 38%. Canada's offshore industry produces the lowest emissions intensive oil in the world. And the largest oil sands companies have joined forces through the Pathways Alliance to deliver a credible plan to get to net zero emissions by 2050 with interim targets along the way. So, we're really, Canadian producers are really proving that it's not an either thing. We know that oil and gas demand is going to continue to grow for decades to come. We know we are committed to the net zero challenge, and we're not going to get there without the billions of dollars of investment and the clean technology innovation and thought leadership that is happening in the industry. And we're proving that you can grow production and concurrently lower emissions at the same time.
Is LNG really one of these potential solutions to the problem of climate change?
Oh, for sure. I would say there's the opportunity for Canada is here now. We can focus on just what we're doing within our own borders, or we can recognize that GHG emissions can't be contained within a country's borders, and we can be a critical part of, as I say, the GHG emissions reduction story globally. If we were able to, let me go back and just talk about what some of the other folks around countries around the globe have done. As I said earlier, the EU has declared natural gas and LNG a green fuel. There's a lot of Western Alliance countries that are demanding strategic gas reserves, and if we can get our countries around the world are turning to natural gas for both energy security and to transition away from coal and other dirtier forms of fuel. And so if we can get more of our product to market, there's a real opportunity for Canada here and now. We can build out an entirely new export industry for our liquefied natural gas, again, rather than backfilling it through the United States to get it to market. And we can bring those jobs and billions of dollars of investment to Canada while lowering global emissions. And it's simply the right thing to do, because there is an addressable oil and natural gas market for decades to come. And our choice is to export our lower emission oil and natural gas and create wealth for this country to further our social and environmental priorities, or have another supplier do it, or another country do it, full stop.
Well, we've got a productivity and a prosperity challenge. And
sure.
I think that, the energy sector has been and will undoubtedly in the future be one of the keys to improving that. We got to take a break for some messages, and we're going to come back and Lisa, you had talked about some of the geopolitical issues associated with the oil and gas business. I wonder if we could turn to that after a break. We're going to be back in 2 minutes with Lisa Baiton, President CEO of the largest oil and natural gas association in Canada. Stay with us, everyone. Welcome back, everyone, to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960. I'm chatting tonight with Lisa Baiton. She is the president and CEO of CAPP, which is Canada's largest association of oil and gas, natural gas producers. She's been in the role just a year and a bit, and I think it's probably been a pretty tumultuous time for you to be there. Lisa, 2-3 years ago, we probably wouldn't have thought as much as we could have and should have thought about the geopolitical, impacts of the oil and gas business. Tell me how the Russian invasion of Ukraine has impacted your job and the role of oil and gas in Canada.
Sure. And this one I really I'm very passionate about. Rising energy securities in the aftermath of Russia's invasion of Ukraine has really led to a realignment of equally important policy objectives across the G7. So equally important realignment across climate change, energy security, / national security, economic and affordability priorities. And I think it's been a massive wake-up call that countries cannot be naive about where their energy comes from. You cannot have national security or continental security or Western alliance security if you don't have energy security. All forms of national security require the uninterrupted availability of energy sources at an affordable price. And we really also can't underestimate the incredible and enviable advantage Canada has when it comes to our own energy security, both in terms of securing it for ourselves, but for our allies across the Western Alliance. Canada is one of the few stable democratic nations that has the capacity to produce significantly more oil and natural gas than we consume. And compare that, for instance, to Japan, which has to import 3/4 of their energy. And, Canada, by contrast, has a wealth of energy resources that are valued not simply because the world needs oil and natural gas, but because Canada is a secure and trusted trading partner. Today we're already seizing that opportunity to some effect. Western Alliance countries that produce oil and gas are the United States, Canada, Norway, Australia, and the United Kingdom, and collectively that accounts for about 32% of total global production. And within that group, Canada is only second to the United States, making up 17% of total oil and natural gas production in the Western Alliance. So, the stable, to have supply from stable, democratic, and trusted nations is an important part, a really critical part of energy security or national security at a time when geopolitics, including the Russian war on Ukraine, as well as the recent Israel-Hamas conflict and the related Iranian shadow war, are really putting greater volumes of oil and natural gas supply at risk. And in this context, Canada's oil and natural gas capacity becomes exceptionally important, not only to ensuring our domestic energy security or our continental energy security, but to Western Alliance. And
I think that it's an issue that really needs to be addressed and thought through, because if we don't meet our own needs and international needs, people are going to go to Venezuela, they're going to go to Saudi Arabia, they're going to go to Iran, Iraq, elsewhere. They're going to get their oil and gas and energy from elsewhere. And we haven't talked about, because you're not responsible for it, uranium and critical minerals that come from Kazakhstan, China, etc. And so I think that too often we think of ourselves only in Canada. We don't think about our geopolitical responsibilities and involvement. And so I congratulate you and thank you for bringing that to the fore. Where do our experts go today? Do they go internationally, or do they go primarily to the United States?
Well, it's there's a lot of domestic use for sure, including in Eastern Canada. It goes off the West Coast, but I would say the majority of our product goes to the US and from global markets from there.
And isn't that part of the problem, is that we just don't have the pipelines and the LNG facilities, the vehicles to export it internationally? And from what I understand, we're selling natural gas to the United States at like a fraction of what they then turn around and sell their natural gas around the world to. And so therefore the lack of our ability to get our products to market is one of the biggest challenges we have, is it not?
Yeah, and it goes back to what I said to you before in terms of where Canada can catch up. And that is on building projects of national interest and moving with at a pace which recognizes the time value of money. And I would say it's an opportunity for Canada, and it's also an obligation. Today virtually all our oil and natural gas exports, as I've said, goes through the U.S. We are working and have the opportunity to diversify our markets through the recently completed Coastal GasLink pipeline, which will supply Canada's LNG facilities. And also soon to be completed Trans Mountain pipeline expansion, which will give our oil exports direct access to tidewater in global markets. And there's a hunger out there. Countries such as Japan, Korea, and Malaysia are already invested in our upstream and LNG export industry, with the goal of making Canadian natural gas a key part of their energy mix. So, seizing this opportunity really has a potential to help Canada claim a powerful voice on the world stage, and to also act in lockstep with one of our largest and most valued trading partners, the US. And I would just say finally that Canada's emerging LNG industry, paired with the United States' world-leading position in LNG export, means that North America is poised to be the most dominant energy bilateral in the world. So again, we really can't be naive about where our energy comes from. We simply can't take it for granted that it's going to remain available and affordable. And during, geopolitical change and upheaval, we really have to position Canada as a big part of the solution and as a trusted ally and a trading partner to the benefit of our allies and to every single Canadian.
Lisa, you're in Calgary, I think, and most of your companies probably are. It's probably no secret that it's oil and gas business, huge benefit to Alberta and Western Canada. But does it matter to my listeners here in Toronto?
Oh, absolutely. It's not an exaggeration to say that the Canadian oil and gas industry is an economic powerhouse for the entire country. And it's not an exaggeration to say that its importance to the Canadian GDP and to the Canadian economy and to Canadian prosperity really cannot be taken for granted. People don't realize that the strength of the Canadian dollar is still very much highly correlated to the price of oil, and that in turn impacts the purchasing power of each and every Canadian. They may not realize that the Canadian oil and gas industry and its exports are a critical component of Canada's balance of trade, making up 20% of the country's total value of trade. They may not realize that oil and gas producers are among the nation's leaders in clean technology investment, providing the backbone of this country's clean technology investment. This year, following several challenging years for capital investment for the industry, we're expecting that investment in upstream production Canada will hit $40 billion. And that in
$40
turn
billion.
$40 billion. And that in turn supports hundreds of thousands of jobs from coast to coast. And it provides new spending towards the environmental performance and emission lowering technologies I talked about. And at last, but certainly not least, the industry is a critical source of government revenues. Last year, the oil and natural gas revenues to governments federally, provincially, municipally, across all of Canada reached $45 billion. And that amount has increased tenfold since historical lows in commodity prices of 2020. So, those revenues have enabled governments to operate.
Hold it. Tenfold. So you're saying that Canadian governments a couple of years ago received $4.5 billion in revenue, and now they're getting $45 billion in revenue from oil and gas?
So we have probably one of the best, what we call royalty regimes in the world, where there's always a floor for Canadians. The royalty structure in Canada is kind of the envy of the world in that Canadians will always benefit from their own natural resources. And there's a floor in the royalty system where if commodity prices are low, they will always still benefit from that. But as commodity prices go high, there's a mechanism in the royalty structure where Canadians get a benefit.
If you're right with a tenfold increase, that's a huge benefit.
Well, for sure. And those revenues enable governments to operate our hospitals and pay our teachers and run critical social programs and support the arts. And in turn, really, it's a meaningful piece of the contribution to Canadians' high quality of life. And, just going through all of those 4 or 5 things I just outlined, I would just ask Canadians to ask themselves, can you imagine what our economy would look like without oil and gas? What would be the value of the Canadian dollar? What would be our balance of trade? What would be what impact that would have on the hundreds of thousands of jobs that are spent? What would be the impact on the dollars going into government coffers and in turn what they're able to spend? So there's simply nothing else that can replace the national economic benefits that come with producing oil and exporting oil and natural gas in Canada. And what's important is realizing that the economic benefit is not mutually exclusive with Canada and the world's climate goals. As I said, we're one of the largest spenders on clean technology investment in the country, spending on average $1.4 billion annually into emissions reduction. And those technologies of the future now and in the future will further emissions.
Pretty important that we need to understand how critically important a 10-fold increase in tax revenue, $40 billion in expenditures, expanding the business, and then $1.5 billion or $1.4 billion on emission reductions. Big numbers. We're going to take a break for some messages and be back with some concluding comments in just 2 minutes with Lisa Baiton, head of the Oil and Gas Industry Association in Canada. Stay with us, everybody. Welcome back, everyone, to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960. My guest tonight is Lisa Baiton, who is the president and CEO of CAPP, Canada's largest industry association for oil and gas, natural gas producers. Lisa, I understand that there was a Supreme Court finding recently that really found that some of the environmental regulation in Canada was inappropriate. Tell me about what that finding was and what your response to it is.
Well, the finding was it was a Supreme Court of Canada reference case, which found that the Impact Assessment Act, or Bill C-69 federally, was really
unconstitutional.
Unconstitutional, federal overreach into the constitutionally defined areas belonging to the provinces. But rather than getting into the constitutionality of it, I would rather just focus on what the opportunity of it is. And that is really just an opportunity for a reset on major projects in Canada, which is really needed, and particularly projects of national interest, as we've been talking about. My organization has been working with a global consultant at Vizian on analyzing how major projects are approached across Canada versus our international peer groups. And it shows that Canada really is behind its peers. And by peers, I mean the US, Australia, UK, Germany, and Sweden, when it comes to approving projects and, getting projects approved takes on an average of 4.5 years, and that's the longest of any peer, and that's any of our global peers, and that's before you even put a shovel in the ground to get it built. By contrast, Germany, as I said before, they 2 years ago decided that post Russia Ukraine, they didn't want to be held hostage from Russia. They wanted to wean themselves off Russian oil and gas. And so within 2 years, they were able to build 3 projects of national interest, 3 LNG import facilities to help them with their energy security and national security needs. 8 years ago, the US and Canada were starting to work on the first LNG facilities. And as I've said, now that should have been a Canadian owned Canada should own that opportunity, and now the U.S. is the world leading LNG exporter, and
could have been us.
Could have been us. So I just use these examples just to show that with the right policies in place, our peers globally are showing that you can actually move things along. And I think going back to the Supreme Court decision, it's a real opportunity to kind of start out with a blank slate and start over and come up with a policy construct to get major projects of national interest built in Canada.
Okay, so let me ask you as a closing question, Lisa, if I could, what do you think needs to be done in Canada in order for us to realize this huge energy advantage that you've described?
Well, I really think it comes down to what Canada wants as a vision for their country. And I would argue there is a vision within our reach, a vision in which after 2050, Canada has the lowest emitting oil and natural gas products for as long as there is demand, a vision where the world sees Canada positioned competitively as the most favored producing nation, as a nation with a credible track record of building not just 1 or 2 projects of national interest, but multiple nation-building projects that will ensure Canadians receive full value of our valuable natural resources, and be able to continue to grow and export our supply of responsibly produced oil and natural gas. And in doing this, we can attract the investment that we've been talking about into emissions reducing major projects, and having all of that capital come here to Canada for the benefit of Canadians, and allowing our economy and Canadians to prosper in a lower carbon world. But to achieve that vision, we have to get the policy environment right. It needs to be clear, it needs to be pragmatic, it needs to be competitive with other nations, it needs to align across provinces and federally, which means we have to collaborate across political lines and across industries. And if we get that right, I think we can ensure that billions of dollars investment comes to Canada, creating jobs, opportunity, and prosperities for all Canadians for decades to come.
collaborate across political lines and between provinces and the federal government? Really? Is that possible?
I'm an ever the optimist, Brian.
Lisa Baiton, President CEO of CAPP, Canada's largest association of oil and gas producers. Thank you so much for joining us and telling us about the importance of the oil and gas business and the vision that we need to have. Thank you.
Thank you, Brian.
Excuse me. That's our show for tonight. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. Good night, everybody.